the Art of Leadership Network.
Well, hey leaders, welcome to the LeadCulture Podcast, part of the Art of Leadership Network. I'm your host, Jenny Catron, CEO and founder of the Foresight Group. We're a company dedicated to helping leaders develop thriving teams. Each week, I'll be your guide as we explore practical strategies to equip you with the tools you need to lead with clarity, confidence, and build unstoppable momentum in your organization. My mission is to be your trusted coach, empowering you to master the art of self-leadership so you'll learn to lead yourself well so you can lead others better. Each week, we take a deep dive on a leadership or a culture topic. You'll hear stories from amazing guests and leaders like you who are committed to leading well. So let's dive in and keep learning on this leadership journey together. Today, I am joined by Sean Morgan. Sean started out in ministry leadership, serving in a San Francisco area church plant as their executive pastor. He went on to help coach and consult with church leaders across the country, and he eventually founded the Ascent Leader, a first-of-its-kind organization focusing on relational leadership development for local church pastors. He also hosts the Leaders in Living Rooms podcast, which I also was a guest on earlier this year. And Sean retired from a 26-year career as a KC-10 pilot in the U.S. Air Force Reserve. So if you ever get Sean talking about being a pilot, that is a great conversation to have with him. But today we talk about leadership. We talk about the importance of healthy leadership. Sean shares how the unclear leader and the inconsistent leader is a hard to follow leader. That's actually a little bit hard to hear. We talk about how leaders don't lead with enough margin, right? How that is such a challenge for so many leaders, not having the margin for just the interruptions, for the space to think, etc. And he shares that when you have clarity on what's important, you know what to say no to. So here's my conversation with Sean Morgan. Well, Sean, this conversation feels a bit overdue. I think you and I connecting was overdue. We finally met just a few months ago at a conference in a green room somewhere, which is typically how it works. But I would love for just to help our listeners get to know who you are. Tell us a little bit about a catalytic moment in your leadership journey, maybe a story or an experience, something that changed how you think or who you are as a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely with the number of mutual friends we have, long overdue. So
Right?
Happy to come on. I thought about this question, Jenny, and for me, I think one of the things that was absolutely catalytic, like a big turning point, was in my early 30s. I was probably 32 when I stepped into ministry, and I'd come out of the military. So I had all this military experience in the Air Force as an aviator, and the stuff in the military, and I think in general, it's true of the first couple of decades of life, is you're rewarded for how hard you're working, like burning the candle at both ends, first one in, last one out, saying yes to everything. And you sort of rise to the top. In some ways, there's some natural ability. In some ways, there's some good timing on things, being able to take hold of things. But it's just, you're just saying yes to everything. You're just doing everything.
Yep.
There's actually like a lack of focus. And then things begin to change in the middle of life, like in your late 30s and 40s, and you shift from doing to leading. And for me, what happened was I left the military, and I stayed actually in the part-time military, but I jumped into ministry. And there was a book out about dynamic growing churches that a church plant I was a part of, the church I came on staff at, was featured in this book. And the same season where I was stepping into leadership as the executive pastor there, people started calling and wanting to meet with us, wanted to tell stories about their church and ask for advice and thoughts. And what shifted in me was this season of just hustling and saying yes to everything, to now I'm working with leaders in a short window and I'm not going home with them. Like their churches, we had churches from abroad. I remember a church in Sydney that came out. It's like, I'm not going back to Sydney. I'd like to go to Sydney, but I'm not going back. So I now have to inspire and also provide direction, instruction, and coaching to people that I'm not going to put in the extra equity, like blood, sweat, tears, the extra time and energy into that system. Right. It's purely going to be listening to them, getting as much out of them as I can, and then pouring it back into them. And that really was a great example for me of how I had to start leading even my own teams in that way of the fruit of my work is not coming from the sweat of my work. It's coming through working and engaging, directing and motivating and encouraging people.
That's such a big one. I think a lot of leaders in various scenarios, hit that spot where it's like, oh, and in fact, I recently was doing a webinar on the topic of delegation, and I was talking about the fact that I remember very specifically a day when it was like my to-do list didn't get touched, but like the work that I had done through my team for that day was significant and valuable and probably my greater work. And I had to wrestle that sense of just ineffectiveness. Is that maybe how it felt to you, of like, because you're such a doer, you're so used to like accomplishing all these things, and then it doesn't feel as effective in some way?
Yeah, you don't have immediate gratification from the fruit of your work. Like I remember I did a lot with my hands in just growing up, working on cars, construction and things like that. And I remember really in college, putting so much energy into things. And literally all you have is like a 10-page paperback and your instructor doesn't even say anything. You just have a letter grade on the top. There's not marks on the page. There's not comments. And I remember having this emptiness of like, wow. And I actually started doing different projects on the weekends where I was using my hands again. And I realized along that journey is like, I can see the progress. It's visible. The progress is visible. And then you move into management and leadership, and it's the least visible, sometimes almost completely non-visible. You have to seek out the mechanisms for gaining feedback, and those can absolutely be challenging. I do think that is probably something that every leader needs to figure out how to do, is how to capture and celebrate stories. And when I say celebrate, I don't mean go pat somebody on the back. I mean developing part of organizational culture that celebrates. If there's one of the most pronounced things that for me, looking at the entire Old Testament, is how many times God stops his people and commands them to celebrate. And even today, the Israeli, the Jewish people of faith, they still celebrate things, stories that you and I have thought of as like these almost fairy tale stories, but like Queen Esther, the saving of a nation, these types of things, they're still celebrated in the Jewish faith today. And I think sometimes that we as leaders need to take note of like God's command for us to pause and really celebrate story and change. So often we can just go, oh, that's great, pat on the back. You know, where's the next
big accomplishment? Yep. Yeah, I'm so guilty of that. How did you reframe that for yourself? That where did you find your significance in work as you moved more into leadership? Can you give us a couple of examples of even how you help yourself celebrate the work you're doing now?
Yeah, for me, the easiest thing and the most effective thing, the easiest thing to do first, and what I believe long-term has been the most effective for me, is building relationships with people. And I don't want to make leaders listening think, oh, you have to be best friends. When I talk about relationships, it isn't friendship in terms of best friendship. There's a kinship, a comradeship that can happen in the workplace between somebody in charge and somebody on the team, where there's a great relational connection. There's admiration and mutual respect and those types of things. There's care. But there's still an understanding of somebody above me is responsible for my work. And ultimately, if I don't uphold my work to the level of standard that my organization it needs from me or better, then there's a problem in that relationship. And so I think for me, the easiest thing was the military really helped with this, the solid chain of command. I mean, no
Right.
matter what in the military, you're always walking around, they have their rank on their shoulders.
You just clearly know who does what. Yep.
Who does what, right? And in some ways, that's actually healthy in a team environment. And that can get conflated between church family, friendships, and team performance, I think. But for me, building healthy relationships allowed me to be more in touch with the highs and lows of what other people are doing from their work.
That's
And
really good.
even, here's one thing that made me better was I even learned things I hated doing and I thought were like below people. Like, I don't want to ask somebody to do that because it's very like, just, it meant like making 1,000 copies of something
right
on the copy machine, sorting paper. And I actually had a lady that worked for me. She goes, I love doing work like that. And I was sort of blown away because I told myself a story in my head of like, I don't want to do this work. Therefore, she doesn't want to do it.
Right,
and if
right.
I ask her, she's going to feel like I'm asking her. And the relationship with her, the connection with her allowed me to learn more about her and allowed her to say, hey, I love doing this work. And I was surprised. So, you kind of go like, why? What do you love about it? And she said, my parents are aging and I have kids in the, maybe it was kids or grandkids in the family environment around me. And there's just so much for me as a mom, grandma, or caregiver to my parents that I feel like I'm always behind. And when I have a chance to do just an hour's worth of sort of busy work, I can work with my hands and produce for the church. But with my mind, I can get caught up on some of the things that I need to be thinking about or saying to people in my family. And so I think those relationships allowed me to get closer to people, but also learn like, what are the things that are life-giving to them that I can partner with them and ultimately like celebrate the highs and lows of things that I would normally overlook.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. I love that. You get to talk with a lot of leaders through the cohorts that you lead, your podcast. What are the greatest challenges that you hear from leaders right now?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest challenge, it's not uniform. There are a lot of churches that are in places of growth and momentum, just overall in terms of their church, their engagement, discipleship, seeing more unity, seeing financial growth. But there's way too many leaders, good leaders doing good work that are not seeing that. They're seeing maybe even some moderate growth in terms of overall engagement, reaching new families, those types of things, but not seeing the financial side of things. It's kind of bizarre. The pandemic hit and the first thing we thought is that the financials are not going to work. Like giving is going to tank. And that really didn't happen. Like people came through. They learned how to give online really quick if they weren't already doing it. It was amazing for several years. But now it's hard to wrap our brains around that we made it through that just fine. In many cases, giving went up. The economy is as strong. The Dow just hit 40,000. There's all these signs of great health, but there's something going on in the psyche of people. I don't know if it's recession fear or other things that giving in a lot of churches is declining. And I think church leaders, again, it's not uniform, but it's pronounced. It's at least a third of the leaders that I know, maybe 25 to 30% of the leaders that are dealing with just really some puzzling questions going like, what are other people doing that we're not doing? Because we did things before the pandemic that were working. We made it through the pandemic. And now on the other side, there's just some real puzzlers out there. And when the financial stuff hits, that just has a whole new weight to it because it means ultimately budget cuts, which are painful no matter what. But if you make sizable budget cuts, we all know that it ultimately means letting people go.
That's right. That's right. How are you coaching them through that? How do you help a leader keep hope?
Yeah. I think, exactly right. So staying encouraged, is really hard in seasons like that.
Yeah.
I think it's easier for me because our work is so relational, our cohort work is so relational, that I truly know the people that I'm working with.
Sure.
It's not just at a distance. So I think, again, the relational side of things really does make a difference. I think encouragement would be the first thing. And then I think practicality would be the second thing. What you don't want to do in a situation like that is make too small of a cut where you have to do it again in 6 or 12 months.
That's good.
So you really need to get, I think from the practical side, you need to get really good financial advice. Hopefully you have that on your team or you have access to that within your church family to really understand as much as possible, not just where things are at now and what you need to do now, but give yourself some margin over the next year, at least the next 6 months, to say, hey, it's going to take us a while to turn this around.
Yeah.
And what you don't want to do is make some cuts now and then turn around, not understand the situation and have to do it again in 6 months, because now what you've done is you've set a trajectory. And
Sure.
instead of it's a one-time thing, that makes sense. Like, let's roll up our sleeves and get back at it. Now you've created an element of anxiety, of fear. Like, is this the last one?
Right. Is
Am
it going to
I
happen
next?
again?
Maybe I should get my resume polished up.
That's right.
And that's just not a good season on a team where some of your best people feel like maybe I should go find the right job now instead of getting let go and being on my heels. So I think there's that, stay encouraged, find the right people around you on a daily basis that do that. And for goodness sake, stay away from the people that are not encouraging to you. Life is hard enough. You don't need people around you, and you certainly don't need people you're paying that are discouraging to you. So I would say that's true in general, but in those seasons, really guard up around that, staying encouraged. Don't neglect some of the most joyous psalms, those types of things in your prayer time, and then practically get ahead of it. Make sure you can do everything you can to do that once and not 2 or 3 times.
That's such good coaching, because I do think sometimes we want to do the bare minimum because it's so painful anyway, right? Like, especially when it comes to making any kind of significant cuts, you're like, oh, well, let's just do the bare minimum. But then you unintentionally find yourself in that place again. And the morale buster that is just significant. So it goes back to the concept of margin, right? Of like, how can we create the margin to help us weather the season we're in? And so that's super good coaching. My sense is, I don't know this is true, so I may be making an assumption, but my sense is that you're a bit of a visionary leader. And how are you thinking about the future? What are you anticipating? What do you think leaders are maybe not seeing? What are some blind spots maybe? Just as you think ahead and as you're helping coach leaders, what do you see?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. The first one is, I would say that you just mentioned margin, and we were really talking about financial, organizational margin at the time, but I don't think leaders lead day to day with enough margin, which means they're saying yes to too much, which means if they're saying yes to too much, it means a couple things. It means they don't have clarity on what's most important. Because when you have good clarity on what's important, you know what you need to say no to, right? Your yes is so powerful. So think of a season where, like, as a leader, you've decided to lead your church through a capital campaign. It's pretty clear for the next, 6 to 9 months that this is number one for everybody. It's sort of like, everybody clear your calendars, like vacations. If they're not like firm, we need to reschedule or say no to them, push them out.
That's right.
This is an all hands on deck season. And you have great clarity. And so very quickly on the heels of that, we have to say no to a lot of things. We have to focus and align. And I think that's a great metaphor that most leaders have either led a capital campaign or been a part of a church that's gone through one. They know exactly what I'm talking about in a season like that. But then when they're not in those seasons, I feel like leaders let their guard down, and they're trying to do too much. They're spread too thin. And then what they don't realize is, if that's true for them, it's true more for their team below them. And
that's good.
An unclear leader, an inconsistent leader, is a very difficult leader to follow.
Wow.
And so I do believe leaders that are doing too much are leaders that are suffering from a lack of margin, a lack of focus, and their team is working sideways instead of toward true north in a lot of ways. So I think that's one of the most common things I'm seeing right now for sure.
Gosh, an unclear and inconsistent leader is a hard leader to follow. Ouch. Ouch. It's so good, but it's so true.
Right? I mean, I'm pointing my finger at myself in that, because sometimes
I'm like, thanks, Sean.
I don't want to be pinned down, right? It's like, I just want to hover a little longer. I don't want to make that decision. I want more data points before I do, right?
Yeah, for sure. And then everything's a good idea, right? Like, or, and especially in ministry, there's a lot of good things coming at us. I'm working with a church right now that they're a legacy church. They have a lot of history, a lot of wonderful ministry things that they have done, but it is complex, and it is actually hindering some of the biggest initiatives that they really want to work towards. And so we're in these discussions of, are there things we not do? And those are hard. Like, those are so hard. But I think we need to hear that. Unclear or inconsistent is a hard leader to follow. That's big and painful.
Yeah.
I had another question, and then I got distracted because that was so helpful and so powerful. What do you think leaders need to do different in today's environment? Like, in some ways, I think we're still kind of holding on to the old. And in fact, that might even influence why we're unclear or inconsistent. I find a lot of leaders are having a little difficulty with casting a vision for the future. I think the pain of 2020 visions that did not come to fruition, just obliterated our confidence in knowing how to lead forward. And so I think that maybe speaks to some of the lack of clarity or inconsistency. But I'd love to hear from you too, as you're looking out and on the horizon and helping coach so many leaders. What do you think we need to be thinking about differently?
Yeah, I think one of the ways that we lead now has to be, we are all motivated by a big L leader, like charismatic, inspirational, all those types of things are incredible leadership characteristics. They're very naturally drawing people, like this magnetic side to leaders. And unfortunately, I think in the past, like, that was enough. Like, we would get on board with leaders. I think what we're seeing in terms of just leadership dynamics is leaders now, the big wins, the big charisma is not checking the box for people these days. And I almost wanted to say younger people, but I think society's changed too. It's also older people.
Yeah.
And we are wanting to see a more caring, benevolent, and relational leader versus the charismatic, big, bold up front. And it was okay to be disengaged as long as we're winning.
Yeah.
And those leaders, they're not attractional leaders. They're not the leaders that the best young leaders are drawn to. And I just got a chance to spend a couple days with Wayne Cordero up in Eugene, Oregon. And now Wayne's tried to retire. And if there's anything that Wayne's failed at, I would say it's trying to retire, because he's not been good at stepping away from things. He is such a great leader. He's such a benevolent, caring leader that wherever he goes, he ends up just in charge of something, and people are drawn to him and they want to be on the team, and they're signing up going, what can we do to help? And then all of a sudden he's in charge of another movement and you're just going like, okay, this, I don't know what this was. It wasn't retirement, but he has done such an amazing job of stepping into sort of leadership at this college that was dying, and just caring for people and bringing the wisdom of God and scripture into things. And they looked at this college and said, we really need to be about, it was a Christian college that had really gotten away from any Bible training. And it was, if anything, it was just known for having a good regional, like JC level basketball team. And they became inspired around what God was doing there and said, we need to be doing a better job training people for local church leadership. And so they've brought leaders from all over. Wayne's church in Hawaii planted something like 70 campuses around the Pacific Rim. And leaders from all of these churches are there now participating and joining in, kind of restructuring and rebuilding and doing such a good work. And then as a result of training people in that environment, one of the things they wanted to do was like, look, we can't send people back to work in a local church all over the rest of the world if they haven't done it here as part of their schooling and their training. So they planted a church for the purposes of training young people. And the thing is just exploding. Incredible stories coming out of that. And so I think what you see there, and as you get to see Pastor Wayne in this season, is he's casting vision. There's big and boldness of that, but he is so relational and so caring. I've done campus tours with him. There's not a single person on the campus, student, faculty, staff, that doesn't know him, that he doesn't know. And I think that is definitely what leaders need to figure out how to do better is we can't let go of God working big, bold, like God tells us, not to be timid, power, love, self-discipline. So we know that, but it's through him. It's not of our own making. Our job is the care. It's the servant leadership that Jesus showed. Like he was highly relational with the 3, the 12. So anyway, I definitely think shifting that way, letting go of some of our old thoughts of how leaders should lead, and really stepping into the mold of the caring, benevolent leader that has all the courage and boldness of that provocative, upfront, charismatic leader of the past.
Yeah, it's really reshaping that mold. I think you're right, and that was the persona of a leader for so many years. That I know I remember going through a stage of just trying to figure out what was authentic to me as a leader, because you felt so much pressure to be that big, bold, gregarious personality. And while there's elements of that I think I can engage from time to time, it's not me at my core. And I felt a lot of pressure to show up that way as a leader. And just had to wrestle through that. So it's also refreshing to hear, finding that caring, benevolent side of who we are and showing up more with that.
Yeah. And it's not a mold that everybody you don't have to be a chameleon and step into that. But like you said, like you were trying to be somebody you weren't in one way. So it's like, you still have to be you. Yeah. Not everybody is going to be relational in the same way, right? Sure. I mean, just the categories of introverts
find the authentic version of that.
Exactly.
In yourself, right? I think, the contrast to that, and this might have been true in your military career as well, but like in my corporate career before church ministry, I felt like I had to shut off the relational side of me, the heart side of me, that didn't need to show up in that context. And then I went into ministry and it was like it swung to the other end of the spectrum, and you had to be this big, gregarious, charming, engaging personality. And some of that was the context that I was in. But there was really just trying to really sift through and figure out, wait, what's most authentic, congruent with who I am and how God has wired me, and how do I show up authentically in that as a leader? Was that a challenge for you in those two very different? I'm assuming very different contexts, right? Military and church.
Yeah, there are definitely elements of that. It wasn't as pronounced for me. I think it could be in some other settings, but in military aviation, you're in a squadron environment. So it's a squadron in the Air Force. It's different, like in the Army, a squad is like 12 people or something like that. But in the Air Force, it's generally between 100 and 120 people. And that's sort of it's a combat unit, and a squadron becomes pretty close. And I was shifting when I stepped into ministry. I was also shifting out of the active side of the Air Force and into the reserves. And the military is pretty synonymous with a lot of change in terms of leadership. You're in a job for 2 to 3 years, and then you move to another location. On the active side, that is true, but on the reserve side, that is not. On the guard and reserve side, you sort of join a squadron, you join this unit, and pretty much you're going to spend your whole career there if you want. Unless you can go other places, there's opportunity. Sure. So what that ultimately means is that you end up having a different level of familiarity And instead of leading through power dynamics and rank, which there's some of that, especially in the moment, like in the middle of a mission, especially in a combat environment, you do what you're told. But there's also the, hey, we're living in a tent for months at a time together, and we're going to go home, and we're in the same unit. We're going to be flying missions at home together. And so the level of just personal vulnerability, and then ultimately like respect that has to come of like people that they don't just respect you because you're in charge and they have to follow you and do what you say. They respect you because they respect you. Those elements in aviation, because you're together all the time, you and your wingman, so to speak. Yeah. And then in the reserve side were much more pronounced. And I think that really helped me in ministry, having those things happen at the same time. It wasn't as polar as what you might expect. In some areas.
Yeah. That's really kind of interesting to hear, but it makes so much sense. I mean, my husband was in law enforcement for a couple of decades. And similarly, his team that he was a part of, they were extraordinarily connected and tight because of the work they did together. He was in SWAT for a number of years. And it's like, those guys have got to have one another's backs. They've got to really have relationship and trust and camaraderie in order to actually do the work effectively together. So that makes sense.
There's some great metaphors that come out of, I'm sure, military and law enforcement. Like, there's somebody in charge in both situations, and there's life and death on the line in certain situations as well. But in the military, especially in military aviation, there is a great way culturally of combating this idea of I'm in charge. I make all the decisions. And we literally, before we go on every mission, we talk about like, I may be the highest ranking person or the most experienced person, but today might be the day where I miss something and the youngest person, the most inexperienced person sees it. And so in a way, there's like this, it's your responsibility as a team member to speak up. If you see something with a different perspective, you're probably the only one seeing it that way. Say something, bring it up. Now, ultimately, I'm responsible as the aircraft commander to make the decision, or the mission commander to make the decision. But you're responsible to bring your best to me. And I may agree with you or disagree with you, and don't take that personally either way. Don't let this puff you up or this tear you down. You're a valued team member, and I may disagree with you today, and tomorrow something similar could happen. And if you shut down on me and you don't bring your A game, you don't speak up, it could have been the one time where you were right and I would have agreed with you. So the military aviation environment does that really well. And I think a lot of times in church teams, we could get better at that same dynamic.
I was going to say, I want to kind of pull that thread a little bit, because there's so much power in that. I hear this from a lot of teams that younger team members might not feel comfortable to speak up. And so we got to ask the question, why? Or if they speak up and their opinion isn't taken and executed on, then they feel like they shouldn't have spoken up. When in fact, it's like, no, we want you to speak up. And sometimes we'll take that. Sometimes we won't. That's part of the leader's responsibility, is to kind of discern all the pieces of the puzzle and determine, is it the right thing? But getting teams to a place where there's a level of comfort in sharing and speaking up, and then also acknowledging that your feedback might not always be acted on, but that doesn't mean stop giving it. Do you have any coaching around that for leaders? You just said we got to get better at it, but how are you addressing that?
I think for me, there's maybe some storytelling. Like, as a leader, tell a story where you were a valued part of a team, but you were wrong. And I think to see the leader up front and know, like, okay, like you're leading here at this level, but you were wrong along the way. You had missteps. In terms of decisions you made or things you would have made. And I also think there's so many leadership skills that are very intuitive. Right. One of them is if somebody offers insight to something or says, I think this direction, the awareness that things might be a little more sensitive if you don't go that direction. I mean, this is part of the problem of having decision-making teams that are too large, because now
Mhm.
you've got too many people to keep happy, too many different
Right.
ways of looking at things, and you're never going to make a decision where everyone's happy. So you have to be careful with that. But when you disagree with somebody and go a different direction, I think just the awareness of how you do that in the moment would be the first intuitive level of leadership of how you disagree. The phrase is like, you're wrong, versus, man, I love that insight. It's really good. I never would have thought of that. Um, I'm not 100% sure it's the way to go. So let's put it on the board as an option. Here's what I'm currently thinking that might cause me to think about that different. What are your thoughts on that? And then allow them to provide more feedback. And then if you ultimately go a different way, I think just the awareness of like, I need to follow up with this person,
That's right.
today or tomorrow.
That's
And it
right.
might just be a text saying, hey, I really value your opinion. Thanks for being on the team.
Yep.
Just little things like that. They don't take a lot of time, but don't sense that and then do nothing
And
about
do
it. Like if
nothing.
you sense it, follow up,
That's
be
good.
encouraging, those types of things.
Yeah, that's so good. One of my core convictions is that communication is an act of respect. And so just that circling back to, hey, I appreciated your feedback. Here's the decision we made, or here's the course we went, but the closing the loop on that so that they know that they were heard. And they also kind of understand why, even if they disagree with it, we've closed the loop on that and communicated. By communication, we've respected their input. I think just furthers that in the culture. Okay, I got to wrap us up, but this is so fun. This is so good. If you could leave leaders with one thought, like as a coach, what would you coach us to be doing right now?
I think one of the things that's been pronounced for me is this idea of obedience. I had a leader recently share a story about just a tough season of leadership, and the conversation got centered around what's our job as leaders, and we do want to see this like massive moments of fruit and celebrating and things like that, but that's not the day to day. The day to day is being courageously obedient to what God's made clear, even if it's hard, even if it's just a moment of, maybe you are in a church that's in a turnaround, a plateau or decline. And like turning a ship around, you don't just swing the wheel and immediately see the boat turn around. Like it's a lot of energy to swing the wheel around, and to see the boat make a turn sometimes takes time. And just the obedience to do the right thing, and the confidence in that, I think I would leave leaders with that encouragement is no matter what season you're in, stay courageously obedient and stay humble.
Really good. Sean, thank you so much.
Glad to
Before
be
we
here.
wrap up, how can we connect with you? Where do we find the podcast? Give us a little.
Yeah. Podcast should be pretty much anywhere. It's called Leaders in Living Rooms, which is a metaphor for our cohorts, just small circles out of the boardroom where there's power dynamics and agendas, and into circles of couches or circles around fire pits where it's relational and conversational. So Leaders in Living Rooms. And then the Ascent Leader is the nonprofit that I lead that runs those cohorts. And we have an Instagram account. I think it's just at the Ascent Leader, ASCENT.
Perfect. Awesome. Sean, thank you. Thanks for just your investment in leaders, your commitment to helping us all lead well. So grateful for you.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
Okay, friends, such a great conversation. Sean is such a thoughtful and intentional leader, and really is building amazing spaces for leaders to connect and really connect on a meaningful level. I just love his commitment to helping equip leaders, especially pastors, in significant ways. So make sure you go check out what Sean and his team are doing at the Ascent Leader. But I would love to hear what you thought of this episode. Let me know if this content was helpful to you. What stood out? What piqued your curiosity? What did you disagree with? What would you like to learn more about? You can connect with me on Instagram and Facebook at Get Foresight. That's GET, the number 4, SIGHT. Or on LinkedIn, you'll find us at the Foresight Group. And then, of course, you'll find me at Jenny Catron on all the social medias. So would love to connect with you there. And then please share this episode. Share it with a friend. Share it with your team. Listen to it together. And let it be a point of conversation for how you can keep learning and growing as a leader in even a leadership team. And then if we can help you with more resources, be sure to go to getforesight.com. That's GET4, SIGHT.com. There you're going to find all kinds of resources, articles, free downloadable resources, and our weekly insights newsletter that you need to be signed up for, because that is usually where I am sharing the most up-to-date new information or content that I'm not releasing anywhere else. So go to getforesight.com, sign up for our weekly newsletter so that you are just getting all the latest information from us. All right, my friend, thank you for joining me today, and be sure to share this episode, tell a friend, and we will see you next week.